I think my main thing with Christianity is I just don't believe it's true. Saying something about wanting to have sex with this girl, and I remember being like, okay, but you're not married. Like we go to church, are you, like you can't do that, right? And he was like, what? No, of course I would still do it. And I'm like, oh.
Would you want God to be real?
So Adam 22 was on the Bryce Crawford podcast, and I think it's super interesting because he shares why he became an atheist, and I think there's some answers that we can react to, and we could be praying for him to become a Christian. So let's get right into it.
I just want to know kind of how you feel about everything, but I definitely know that there's a lot of there's a lot of clips about you in Christianity on the internet, and from what I can tell, you're in a lot of opposition, or you have a lot of pushback towards Christianity, I guess you could say. What's your biggest issue with Christianity that you just don't like?
I think my main thing with Christianity is I just don't believe it's true. I don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. I don't believe that the Bible is anything more than just, a series of lessons that probably should just be taken that way. I mean, when I was a kid, I was really raised in a Christian household, and my parents made me go to church all the time. And even as a real young kid, I had this almost physical resentment towards going into that environment. I just kind of sensed that it wasn't for me from a really young age. But then as I started to get older, I started to realize that a lot of people weren't really as serious as I was about it, in the sense that I looked at the teachings of the Bible that I was learning about in Sunday school or whatever, even though I wasn't particularly thrilled about the church experience, I still felt okay, I should be trying to figure out what this is all about. And as time goes on, and I started to realize all the other kids that I am going to Sunday school with aren't as serious about this, or they don't think, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who was basically saying something about wanting to have sex with this girl. And I remember being like, okay, but you're not married. We go to church, are you, you can't do that, right? And he was like, what? No, of course I would still do it. And I'm like, oh,
So essentially, hypocrites turned him off to Christianity. Or not even just hypocrites, just someone who's not following Jesus. And that's kind of sad, honestly. There's always the joke is I can't go to church because all they are is just a bunch of hypocrites. And then they say, well, come on down. We got room for one more. Obviously, we're all sinners. We're going to fall short, and you're going to do things that is sad and just against teachings of the Bible. But does that mean because people don't take it serious that you shouldn't believe in God? It's sad, but that is a turnoff, and that's why it is important how we live our lives. And obviously, we're not going to be perfect, and by the grace of God, we can be saved, but we can try to do our best to be a light for Jesus.
We both go to church, but I'm over here assuming that we got to take the gospel literally. And then I remember when I was 13, one of my friends just introduced me to the Satanic Bible, which is by no means the entry point to atheism that I would recommend for anybody, because it's kind of goofy and ridiculous, and it's from 80 years ago or whatever. But I remember reading it and just being like, oh, okay, this is where I'm at. I don't believe in God. I don't think any of this stuff is true. And I actually think that you can live a completely moral and pristine life without the Bible. And ever since then, I turned my back on it. And it was actually kind of weird, because I feel even though they've never admitted it to this day, I think that I kind of turned my parents atheists too, because I would just always be presenting them with the newest religious argument that I read online, because this is the very early days of the internet, where I'd be looking up stuff about atheism all the time. And I think it kind of got to my parents, because when I really think about it, I haven't heard them really mention anything regarding religion in the last 20 years or so, even though if they were here right now, they would say, you didn't convince us of anything. Of course not.
Yeah.
But I do think that I had a bit of that impact on my parents too.
Yeah. So your entry point to atheism was the Satanic Bible. But when you read it, you were like, I agree with this more than I do the Christian perspective of the worldview.
I agreed with the part that this was anti-Christianity or anti-religion, doesn't believe in God. That part I agreed with. If you actually go read the Satanic Bible, it's filled with all this sort of goofy, witchcraft type stuff. And, and it was written a long time ago, so I got to give them a little bit of grace. And it was very influential on a lot of people, but for sure not, the definitive guide to how to live a great life. But definitely kind of hit me at the time where I needed something to kind of show me like, oh, there's a lot of other people out there living different lifestyles and composing their moral code from, a lot of different stuff aside from just the Bible, which I grew up with.
Do you think any religion could be true? Do you think that there could be one that is true, or are you just totally against any of them being true?
No, for sure. I think like it's possible. Like if I were, I guess what you're asking is like, do you think that there is a religion that incorporates the supernatural or something along those lines? Because for sure, like when I've read about like secular humanistic religions, that's a lot closer to what I believe. I just don't even really feel the need to put a name on it. I remember being a young kid and like,
I mean, those things are like religions, but they're not. Secular humanist is not something that you believe in a higher power. I don't think you just believe in materialistic things. But yeah, it's sad to think, yeah, I'm going to go follow an atheistic, the Satanic Bible, which is an atheistic, essentially worldview. Most of them are. But the thing is, he said, I'm going to give them grace because I read it a long time ago. Like, did you read the Bible recently? Like, you should give grace to maybe when you were 13, you didn't understand all of the Bible. Like, that's also a point maybe you should think about.
Dad got locked up in the feds for like a year when I was like 12, and he was basically on trial and in the media dealing with these charges because I'm in like a small town where it's like that kind of stuff. It was like a mail fraud charge. Basically, he was like accused of using his role in the local government. He was an alderman, which is really like kind of a small time role in politics locally. And then he also worked at this construction company, helping them get jobs and stuff like that. And he was basically accused of like using his role in government to help get jobs for his business or whatever. He ends up taking a plea deal, doing a year. And I just remember during that time period, my mom really leaning on the church and like, the church being a big part of like what kept her sane and mentally well during that time period. And I remember my mom explaining to me that was why she knew that religion was for her. And I said to her, I'm like, Mom, you could have got that out of a bowling league. Like the fact that you had a bunch of people who were supporting you and emotionally sort of lifting you up, that's awesome. But that has nothing to do with whether what's in this book is true or not. Now, I'm not like a religious scholar, and there's a lot of, people who really make it their thing to debate Christianity and to be able to sort of debunk the Bible, whatever. Yeah. I don't really get into all that. That's like kind of above my pay grade. It's like that's actually why it's kind of funny even doing these conversations with you, this being the second one, because it's like, I don't really even talk about religion. Like a huge percentage of the people that I do podcasts with and people that I interview and everything, they are Christian.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't seem like they take it serious in any meaningful way. Like they'll tell you that they pray, but I never really see them. We'll be having a conversation in which, to me, if you were religious, it would seem like, okay, this is the point where you're going to start talking about God, and it doesn't really come up. I feel like to a lot of people in hip hop, it's like impossible to imagine being like outwardly a non-believer. I actually know multiple people in hip hop who are atheists but would never say it publicly because it's so looked down upon in the black community and in hip hop.
Really? Like I said, it seems like a lot of the turnoff for him is just people who don't even take the Bible serious. Like, oh, I'm a cultural Christian, yeah, blah, 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 blah. They might pray. Oh, I pray before I go to sleep. But do I actually follow what the Bible says? Do I try to do my best at least to bring glory to God in all that I do? Punches Culture says, I was raised Christian and I became an atheist on my own. Then I became a Gnostic. Then in my early 30s, I became a Christian again. Praise God.
Be anti-religious.
I see what you're saying. Dang, would you want God to be real if he was real?
Probably not the God in the Bible. I feel like the God in the Bible seems like he's kind of not the person that I would expect to be the greatest supernatural ruler of the universe. But I guess if I could create a world in which there was a God who was basically like a judge, like he's like the one man's supreme court of what's right and wrong in the universe, and if you could kind of constantly go to him and say, hey, like, I have this dilemma and I'm not sure what I should do. Can you tell me how I should go about this? That sounds very useful, like, but I think it's kind of on human beings to figure that stuff out for themselves in a variety of ways. But if I could do that, yeah, or if there was a supreme God where I could say like, hey, this dude is pure evil, you should, orchestrate a scenario in which he spends the rest of his life in jail or whatever. I mean, that would be useful, but I mean, that's not really how most people who are religious think that it works either.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, you were talking about morality, how like you felt like that you could live a good moral life outside of Christianity when you were talking to your buddy, and that's how it unfolded. So where do you think people get their standard of morality from?
I mean, I think it just takes an objective analysis of the world and the kind of world that you want to live in. I remember last time we did this interview and I promise I won't just say that over and over throughout this whole interview because it's going to be tempting. But I remember we talked about like moral relativism, which is basically like the idea that every different culture has their own idea of what's right and wrong, and that people from our culture have no business telling another culture like, hey, this is messed up, this is wrong. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that, the pursuit of understanding what the good life is very much something that can be applicable to everyone. And I think that, for instance, all over the world, there's female genital mutilation taking place, which is basically like, young girls, their fathers or their families will essentially have their vaginas sewn up upon birth or at some point when they're very, very young. And that's basically to ensure that they stay a virgin throughout their life. And this produces, a ton of like horrible health effects. And I could go into even more detail about how disgusting the process is. And obviously, I think that's just completely wrong and disgusting.
Okay, but if that's completely wrong, who are you to tell them that's completely wrong? If there is no God, there's no morality. They think it's okay. They think that they're doing probably the best thing in the world. But who are you to tell them if there is no higher power, there is no law above the law? That's why it's so important to realize that God has given us a law. He's given us morality. He's written the law within our heart. That's why, I don't know, we have grounds to say you can't do that, even though they think it's okay. So he thinks that there's objective morality.
And I think you can say that objectively about our society. If you were to find some rogue actor that was doing that, it would be just as disgusting. But also you could look at other cultures. And it's not to say that like, Europeans or Americans or white people have everything figured out. And there's these savage tribes of people all over the world who are doing the other thing. I don't think it does.
He thinks he's more moral than God. Because he's like, well, I think God's an evil monster because he's just like a dictator. Maybe
be viewed as like our culture as a whole being superior. But I definitely think that, you can take a look at what other people have going on and be objective about it.
Yeah, so I think you and I could agree that there is from what you're saying, that there is a standard of truth. But I guess, I would get my standard of truth from the God of Christianity. Where do you get your standard of truth from is what I'm asking.
So I read a lot of different authors, philosophers, people who talk about, what the good life is and kind of debate those things internally or have conversations with people about that sort of stuff, about what right and wrong is. For me, it's like that kind of thing is so simple in a way, like the idea of like, the example I just used, like, yeah, it's bad to cut your daughter's vagina off. That's pretty easy for me to deduce that that's all bad. But, I feel like those kind of conversations, like, I'll even give you an example. There's like a podcaster, a female podcaster I saw her at an event a couple months ago. And I just like off the top of my head, the first thing I thought of to mention to her was like a video I had just seen basically that was very, very negative to her. And I just mentioned it like to her right away. I'm like, God, I just saw this video like about you. It was crazy. Like, did you see that? And I could see it in her eyes right there that she knew what I was talking about and it hurt her feelings. And then I brought it up to my wife and she just said to me like, well, you probably shouldn't put that out, right? And I hadn't thought about that until that moment. Up until that moment, my mind had solely been on like having a viral clip, viral moment. And she said like, you don't have anything against her. Why would you bring that up? Like, that's for sure. Like, she's going to feel bad about people seeing that and you're going to look like a jerk as a result. And I thought, oh, like, that is a good point. I'm so glad that I have you in my life to check me when I'm sort of riding this tide of ego of like, oh, I'm going to get this viral clip out. And she sort of said that. And I, right there, that's just like a little chunk of, deciding what was the right or moral thing to do in that moment.
But yeah, but where do you think she got that idea from? Like, there's so many things within the Bible saying, like, to not, I don't know, put other people down. Never think of yourself more highly than you know, or to be dishonest for your own gain. So many things like that. 1 Corinthians 7:2, but because of temptation of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman of her own husband. Are you responding to Corpse?
And obviously I get it wrong frequently, I'm sure. But I think that even with someone like my wife who's not, a philosopher, she's not trained to have these sort of conversations. I think anybody can kind of sort out what they think is right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I feel like everyone has like a nature built inside of them, but I think that nature comes from God. And then aside from like the moral system that's built into us, I think that the sinful nature we're just born into, according to Christianity, everyone's born with a sinful nature. How like when I was 4 years old, right, I remember I was on a trampoline with my buddy and I had like a plastic Pirates of the Caribbean sword and I just smacked him in the face with it, and like hit him. No one taught me to do that. I just did it. And like, you know what I mean? I just hurt him without like no one teaching me that. And so that was in me and I recognized that, but also the standard. And so I guess like even from an extreme thing, because we can talk about like the female genital mutilation, we can talk about, underage prostitution in foreign countries. We can talk about all this grand stuff. But even if you go down to a T of like if you punched me in the face and I punch you back in the face, Jesus would say, don't do that. But literally last night we're playing basketball and two of my friends are chirping at each other. And this random guy that was playing with us was like, yo, you better catch a fade with him. So even he was like, well, this is how we settle things. You guys just fight it out. And so even that is embedded in culture, whereas Jesus would say like, actually don't do that. And even that was the challenge at the time that this is in like
funny.
Matthew.
He's been hanging around a lot with Cliff, so that's good. Hopefully Cliff is helping him and teaching him. Yeah, humanity says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If someone punches you, you punch them back. But Jesus says, actually, no, turn the other cheek. Pray for your enemies. Love those who persecute you.
Chapter 6, where Jesus is given like one of his most famous sermons, and he says, society says an eye for an eye. Like if you hit me, I hit you harder back. But he says, if someone hits you on the cheek, turn and give them the other cheek, basically presenting this idea of not repaying evil with evil, which is so hard in today's society. Like I can get so heated and things like that. And I bet you can too, because we're all human. Like I do that. But having that ideology challenge me, I don't know. I guess when I took on the moral standard of the Bible, it made me live a fuller, richer life. It wasn't like God being a cosmic buzzkill, in my opinion.
No, yeah. I mean, that like catch a fade thing is crazy, because I know a lot of people where that's kind of like how their mind works, where it's like if we have a serious enough disagreement, or if you've disrespected me to such an intense extent, then we should actually physically fight, because that's the only way that we're going to get over this tension between each other, which to me is crazy. I don't really understand it. I've never been the type of person who felt like I had to like fight with my friends in order to like get through some stuff. For sure I've gotten in fights with my friends over the years. But I always thought it was like a pretty regrettable decision. And it's like, if somebody is capable of disrespecting me to such an extent that I feel like the only way that I'm going to feel better about this exchange is if we actually just throw hands, I don't even think that's like a person that I want in my life, or a conversation that needs to be had. I don't think that really.
Well, Matthew 5:38 says, you have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek. If you are sued in court, shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Amen. So God has called us to a higher standard, and this is something that may not be always easy, may be more difficult. But so guys, I encourage you all to go to Jesus. Know that he loves you. He's longing to have a relationship with you. Put him first above all else. It will be the best decision you guys could ever make.